Welcome back to our series that we're putting together with our three doctors having a conversation that hopefully you can take away some nuggets. Today, we're going to be talking about what causes subluxation. So, just to remind you, the spine, when it moves out of balance or when there becomes an area that's compressing the nerve or changing how the nerve flow, which is sending the energy to the rest of the body, the cells, the tissues, everything that you can think of, the organs, that is called a subluxation. So it could happen right up at the top of the spine, could happen lower in the spine. Generally, it's all working together. So a lot of times when we have a subluxation up top, we are also going to have compensation happen throughout the rest of the spine that can then affect the integrity of that neurospinal system. So why does that happen? Like what loads the body or stresses the nervous system enough that the spine moves out of place, right? So I don't know if one of you wants to take it from here, like what causes these things?
Yeah, well, I can dive into it just simply or surface level. Is we always break it down into the three T's, or what's called thoughts, traumas, and toxins. And a lot of us do a really good job of thinking about traumas or physical trauma, because a lot of people come into the office and they say, yeah, I slipped and fell, or I landed on my back, or I strained a muscle this way. And I think the general population does a fantastic job of recognizing physical trauma, but a lot of us certainly do not do a good job of recognizing how much toxins and how much our thoughts influence our actual subluxation in our nervous system. I'll dive into a little bit on, the thought piece, and then maybe I'll let one of you guys piggyback on the next part. But thoughts, I always break that down into a simple explanation of, it's cliche, but we are truly a product of the 4 to 5 most people that we surround ourselves with on a day-to-day basis. Now, we all probably think we surround ourselves with great people on a day-to-day basis because that's what we want to attract, but that goes beyond just the people that you see in a physical realm. Like, one thing I make an example of is like turning on the news, especially nowadays at the end of the evening, right? Like, a podcast I also was just listening to was talking about, taking that negative stress away, because most of the news nowadays is primarily negative,
Mhm.
just at the end of the night, and allowing your body to disconnect from that negative stressor in your life just for a week can make drastic change in how well your body is processing thoughts and emotional trauma.
Mhm.
So that's just one
Right.
example. I mean, we could go on and on and on, but
One right there. If you just turn the news off a little more, your spine's gonna be so much more balanced.
100%.
Yeah,
But
that's good. That's good. Cami, how about you?
I'll jump into toxins. So, toxins isn't only what you're physically putting into your body, like the food you eat, the drinks that you drink. It's also the things that you expose yourself to in your environment. So, a lot of people love a lot of perfumes, a lot of scented things.
Mm.
That is really hard for the body to process, especially because they're all artificial. There is a difference between artificial scents and more natural scents too. So, not to shame Bath and Body Works, but it definitely is one of those things where it's hard on the body and it definitely affects your hormones as well. And then also just to jump into the food that you eat as well, I'm a huge advocate for intuitive eating. Your body, if you are able to tune in and listen to it, it'll tell you what you're hungry for and also when you're full. Um, it's not every day that we practice that. Diet culture is huge, especially fad diets. So but they set you up for failure because it's telling you to do the one thing that we are in like naturally supposed to be able to do, which is listen to our bodies. And it tells you not to do that because you can't trust your body, which is so far from the truth.
First of all, I was on a walk yesterday, and back to Jacob's point about the news, I was with a friend, and she was highlighting how stressed out she had been from some of the news that happened when she was already in a stress state. So she had gone through a surgery, was home, not working out of her normal realm, and then watching some of the things that were unfolding on the news. Again, it probably doesn't matter which news channel you're tuned into, that's just two sides of the same kind of like traumatic news feed. And it just sent her on a spiral. And the unfortunate part, there's a lot of good things about these things, right? Our access to a lot of information, we can connect with a lot of people, we can have sometimes even an algorithm that's sending us some good things, right? But there's so much that we also get exposed to that is feeding that that animal almost of like negativity in us, and we have to have the awareness of when to shut it off and to think back, like even just 30 years ago, people were not exposed to the like rapid fire of information that we're under. So to really protect that mind body or that mental arena in our existence is probably harder than ever. And I think that's part of the reason why it's like sometimes a criticism of chiropractic is like, well, once you go, you always have to come back. And it's like, you don't have to. It's always a choice. And just like you don't have to brush your teeth, it's a choice. But because we live so, I'm going to say naturally, like we're mammals, right? Like we're like meant to have some more connection to the earth and animalistic nature. But for the most part, like when we're existing, like on the amount of hours that we're on screens with the lack of sunlight, the lack of real food, we live in a culture that it's harder than ever to know what is actually health food. And to even know what intuitive eating is, because perhaps we have been so disconnected from even listening to our bodies. Like, how do I even begin to listen to my body? So that is why I think the average person coming in, there's a lot of unwinding that needs to happen because we have possibly decades of stored stress, whether that's coming from some of the physical things, like I sit at my desk the same way for the last 22 years with my monitors tilted this way, and I sleep on the same side, and I slipped and fell back in, 1997 and broke my tailbone, all those things that you think about. But then you also think about like, and I'm sitting next to a coworker that I really don't like in a job I really don't like, and then mental negativity, like our nervous system grabs onto it. And that's part of the reason why a lot of times we feel like shoulders are up in the ears and there's not a lot of adaptability in that system because so much has been stored in that body.
Yeah, and I also want to speak to that as well, just because I feel like a lot of times we get mad at our bodies because we are holding on to that. We just can't let it go. And I don't understand why this is hurting. And your body's always trying to protect you. Like it's never trying to like fight against you. Sometimes it might be because it's trying to be like, hey, it's like, listen,
leave this job.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it's always trying to protect you. And I think that if we learned to look at things that way as well when it comes to our body trying to talk to us, I think a lot of things would come more easily. And there wouldn't be so much like back and forth fighting between us and our bodies.
That's good. And sometimes it's like, well, I can know this. Like I can know that I need to move my body more so that I'm not just, what do they say? The sitting is the new smoking, right? I know I need to move my body more. I know I should be trying to prioritize eating local foods or less fast food or whatever. I should be drinking water, right? But it's like we're not going for perfect. And I think that's one of the biggest things here is like when we look at resiliency and adaptability, whether we're talking about physically, mentally, emotionally, chemically, spiritually, when we are voting essentially for like, I did a couple good things for myself today versus I know I didn't do anything good for me today. That's part of how we start to build more resiliency, more ease. And that little baby step that you took to do it, like maybe I did drink a little more water today. Maybe instead of drinking diet Mountain Dew or something, first thing when I woke up, I had a glass of water. Like that over time, extrapolated out, is how we build back resiliency in our nervous system, right? That's just one example. Same thing with mentally, like catching your mental thought process and just even having awareness to it is a big deal, right? And I know I can think back to when I was totally oblivious to what I was thinking and like everything happened to me instead of like me being aware of like I let myself get in a negative place and then watching kind of what would come out of more negativity, right? And the awareness to just like I could think a new thought. I don't have to chase this thought down that same negative loop that I'm familiar with. I could stop, which feels really hard at first, right?
It's not like a natural thing at that point. Once you find yourself there, you're like, oh, this is going to take some work. And I also think like branching off of that is fear and anger sells, right? And like, it's not only the news, like the news wants you to feel something and they do a really good job about
And
it.
it's not butterflies and rainbows.
It's not that. Yeah. So not to like shame anyone for watching the news. Like I get wanting to be informed, but it's also the ability to recognize like, I just watched something. How are they trying to make me feel? Like, do I actually want to feel that way? Is
good.
Powerful.
Definitely. Yeah. And then knowing that you can make new choices. Just because you've always done something doesn't mean you have to keep doing it, right? And it doesn't mean that you can't come back to it either, right? Because there are times where it's like, this is not healthy for me right now because of the state I'm in. And I could come back to it when I'm in a different state and it might not affect me the same way. And I think that's true for our kids. I know my son was at a relative's house yesterday who had a news cycle on. He's not used to hearing any of this, right? Because we don't generally have anything on in our house like that. And, I picked him up and he said, you know, did you know that kids might die? And you could see that it was like in
Mhm.
his awareness and he was worried about it. And we had a good conversation, but also like how many households is that playing all the time, right?
Mhm.
And we almost get numb to these thoughts that are circulating around us.
Yeah. I would jump back to something Lona said earlier, was talking about resiliency. And when we're talking about, building up your body and your environment against, all the thoughts, traumas and toxins around your environment, it's easy to think that I have to be perfect and I have to switch everything. I have to eat organic. I have to detoxify my home. I have to detoxify my living space, my mind space. It gets overwhelming, right? So, and I just want to piggyback on the fact that she said just changing something as simple as, drinking a little bit more water when you start the day, turning off your phone before you go to bed. It has such giant ripple effects that you couldn't even imagine. The example I like making actually is taken from a book that we talk about here in the office called Power versus Force. If you think about mathematics, and I'll try and make this simple, but if you multiply a decimal fraction by 10 zeros behind the decimal by another decimal fraction, the calculator inevitably is going to have to cut off that number at one point, right? And that is an estimation of what that actual answer is. Now, if you multiply that 1 million times over, that number is so far derived from what the actual answer is at that point. So I make that example to say the smallest change in your life pattern and the smallest change in your life habits can make such a drastic ripple effect that you wouldn't even realize it. So when we're going through all these examples of things you can change, whether that's adding more chiropractic adjustments to your life, eating a little bit more organic, drinking some more water, maybe looking at how toxifying the home space is, any step forward is always a giant ripple effect. You don't have to do it all today, and you definitely don't have to do it all at once. That's what health is. It's just recognizing and returning the mind space of like, okay, I can do a little bit more here. I can do a little bit more there. Because life is always going to be stressful, and we have never lived in such a time where we're so dimmed to the actual macro stressors of life. We live in such a curated environment with less natural light, accessibility to more news and more information that we've ever had in our entire lives. And the more we wake up to that fact, the more we're going to start seeing things change. So when you're thinking about, making some health choices, don't try to do it all at once, and just remind yourself one tiny step in the right direction is so much more than you could ever think about.
That's great.
There's a reason zebras don't get ulcers, right? I don't know if you've read that book, but
It's a book?
yeah,
That's funny.
we were meant to like have stress and then have a stress cycle and then it'd be over. And that's like not how it is anymore.
Right. Yeah, definitely not if you're staying up late and watching whatever's on your phone or whatever, going to bed, waking up, picking the phone up right from the maybe you didn't sleep well, right? You're constantly in a fight or fight or freeze, nervous system set point. And that's part of where, if left long term, it feels very normal to you because this is your baseline, right? But that doesn't mean it has to stay your baseline. However, it is going to be important for you to see that things will have to shift and change, starting with you as your own best doctor, making some of those decisions that I'm willing to change some of these things because I do want a different outcome. And I think because of our news and our commercials for decades now, we've been sold a message that health comes from generally a pill, right? Like if you think about what we've seen on commercials for a long time. I can remember as a kid watching some of that and being like, why would anyone take that? Did they listen to the like 3 seconds that came at the end? And again, not to say if you're taking medication that that's all wrong. It's just that when we recognize that everything that is actually generally good for us long term is a process, it's never a one and done quick fix. It's back to what Jacob said, it's a small decision made over and over and over again that creates a major ripple. And now you start to do a few of those things, as well as sometimes it's just what you won't do anymore. I won't stay up past 10:30, or I won't, if I'm actually tired, I'm gonna let myself rest. That alone, we're in a culture that has never, in recent years, prioritized people saying like, I actually just need some rest, right? That is one of the biggest ways to allow your system to downshift out of that sympathetic state, is to actually see the value in letting your system have a nap, taking a time out from things that stress you out. Rest can mean a lot of different things, right?
Yeah. I had someone tell me, I think it was Tuesday, that she's like, I don't know what it feels like to not be like tight and sore. And like I think about all the people that are walking around with like their chest feels tight, they have a lump in their throat, their stomach hurts. And like that's their normal. And that's it doesn't have to be like that. And I think sometimes you don't realize that there's an alternative option.
Or that it could get better.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yep. So we are here to help Sherpa you through making some of those decisions. None of us are talking about this because we're perfect. We're all doing this along with you, and making those votes into one camp versus the other. And I think we've all can attest for sometimes when you slide off of things that you know are good for you, and you can feel what that feels like to have to get back on a different track. And that's part of the learning curve too, is like that being your own witness of like, I made this choice and now my stomach does hurt, or I made this choice and I didn't sleep well last night. I'm not going to do that again, right? And that leads to more of that resiliency quotient and actually helps keep your spine balanced and your nervous system. Yeah. Thanks, guys.
Yeah.